Post. It's quite interesting. People talking about inclusion, and you say in some way they're full of it. They're not really talking about full inclusion. What was the premise of this op-ed piece?
You didn't read it?
I did read it, yes.
I'm kidding. Well, here's the thing. There's been a lot of talk about diversity since the Oscars So White campaign, and that's all good. That's all good. But the premise is that whenever we speak of diversity, the go-tos are racism or sexism or ageism, or we talk about religion. But the fact of the matter is that 20% of the population in this country is dealing with disability, and we are more likely to be unemployed than any other group. We have twice the unemployment level of the other group. So I feel like, okay, if you're going to talk about diversity, you can't leave out this particular group of people, because we are always left out in that conversation.
You mentioned
the go-to on the topic of diversity is always race.
Right.
That's not real inclusion. That's not real diversity. That's one aspect of it.
How often does somebody get cast to be in a wheelchair and yet has two fine working legs, and the person who lives in a wheelchair isn't given an opportunity for that role?
Well, as I said, when you have a class of people that are more likely to be unemployed, the chances of them having some sort of support job on the side when they want to be an actor. I know a lot of people that are actors that are working at this that are in a wheelchair or blind or hearing impaired, or they have some mobility impairment, any number of possible disability categories can come up. And as I said in my article, there's an audition that called for a person in a wheelchair, but they held them on the second floor of a building with only 2 floors and no elevator. And so when you start from the premise of inaccessibility, you're not going to give that person an opportunity. And so when you have numbers like, as I said, 20% of the population, but we are represented less than 2% of the time in film and television. And of that 2%, an even smaller, less than half of that, are actually people with disabilities representing those characters. What's
been the reaction to the article since you wrote it?
It's been positive. I haven't had any trolls.
That's good.
Not yet, anyway.
We've had, just on Huffington Post alone, it's had over 5,000 likes, and to say nothing of my Facebook page blowing up and people sharing it, and so it's making the rounds, and I'm very happy about it because I felt it was an important subject. Thus the title. I wanted to put a title out there that was provocative, got people to pay attention. I didn't just throw it out there immediately. I thought about it for a few days because I didn't know who it might make angry. But then I thought, to hell with it.
Right.
People need to get angry.
Your story is one. You were an actor, and you were struggling. Is it true you were selling cowboy boots in California when you got the call for Seinfeld?
That is so funny. Where do you guys get your information?
Tell me, is it true or not? It
is true, yes. But actually, I had already lost that job by the time Seinfeld came up. I think I lasted about 3 months. I had to wear these suede bullhide Tony Lomas, and nothing against Tony Loma, but I'm the last person you want to see in cowboy boots. I'm sorry.
When you were...
I ended up with tendinitis in the Achilles heel. So that, I needed to get out of that before I became even more screwed up.
Sure. When you talk about diversity and disabilities, when you went for that role and got that role on Seinfeld, were they looking for a little person, or were they just looking for Kramer's friend and you happened to sort of fit whatever they were looking for?
Well, that first episode was specifically geared toward the idea of little people portraying stand-ins on television shows. So they were looking for a little person to play that role. But that's not to say that I haven't gotten a number of other roles where they weren't looking for a little person. For example, the episode of Bones that I've gone back on and recurred on where I play one of the heads of the State Department, and I'm always sort of at odds with David Boreanaz's character on that show. So there's been a good number of roles for me, I think, because I built enough of a reputation as not just this little person actor, but an actor that I get opportunities like that to come up.
Yeah.
So,
the article is on
which is
Huffington.
important. I think it's important to show that, like here's another prime example of what we talk about at the SAG-AFTRA Performance with Disability Committee, is the idea that a person who happens to be mobility impaired in a wheelchair, and the scene is entirely, say, on a bus, or someone seated in the subway, or you have these kinds of characters coming up all the time, and why not consider people that might be mobility impaired or in a wheelchair to, say, sit behind a desk at a reception's office, and that's their scene. These kinds of scenes, you've seen them all the time, and you just don't think about the person sitting there. And a classic example is Danny Murphy, who's a character who's a paraplegic character actor. Worked with the Farrelly brothers many, many times. He was a childhood friend of theirs, and he worked many, many times with them. So once he was a mental patient in the hospital, another time he's a taxi driver. And this is a guy that you never knew in a lot of these shows was this other person in real life.
Yeah.
So, and that's what the craft of acting is all about.
You
don't necessarily know who the other person is in real life.
It's a great point. The article is called "If You Don't Really Mean Inclusion, Shut the Blank Up." Danny Woodburn played Mickey on Seinfeld, as well as many other roles. Danny Woodburn, thank you very much for a very provocative
thank
and
you.
interesting article.
You guys are the first news agency to call me, the first media outlet to call me and say, hey, this is important to talk about. And kudos to St. Louis, man.
Thank you, man. Danny, I appreciate it. Good luck. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
You got it. 8:58 KTRS.
In the St. Louis Metro, there are 96,000 people receiving some sort of